Hello and welcome to Learning Music with Pat. I'm going to start off by showing you some charts. You know, music is a lot more than just playing notes and getting the right interpretation and all of the things that I teach you here. But you have to understand a little bit about a keyboard. You don't have to be a piano player. I took 3 years of piano lessons before I switched to the woodwinds. I was very young at the time, but woodwinds was really what my interest was. But my parents thought, and they had a point, that to start off with a piano, you would actually learn a lot more about music than if you just were taught an instrument and you learned how to figure the notes and play the notes. And I can understand why they felt that way. I would not recommend, though, that if a child wants to play an instrument and they don't want to play the piano, I wouldn't start them off on piano. My parents did it with me. It worked out fine. My sister stayed with keyboard instruments, and my brother stayed with brass instruments, and my father played all of the brass instruments, and my mother played brass instruments as well as piano and organ and the different keyboards. But I wouldn't recommend it in this day and age to force a person to take piano lessons who doesn't want it. But what you do want to teach them, and what most music teachers don't teach them, is the whole range of music. Where does it come from? What is the range of music that you're playing on your instrument? Where does it fit in with the keyboard? What are the sharps and the flats, and how can you visualize that? What are octaves, and what are harmonics? All of these things are important to understand music, but you're not going to get it just by playing a single instrument such as a clarinet or a trumpet, whatever the instrument is. You have to see the full range. And so therefore I do spend time with keyboards, not because I consider myself to be a keyboard player. I did play piano when I was young, but I was very young, and I wouldn't even attempt to do it now because I'm fully focused on woodwinds. But let's take a look at this first chart. This is a chart. These charts are mine. They're not handsome, but I can't buy charts that I need for what I do, so I make my own up. But here's the full range piano. That is, it has 88 keys. If you take the top and the white and the black keys and you counted them, you would find that it has an 88 key piano or keyboard, or at least represents that. In the middle, you have this key here, which is called middle C. Now, most woodwinds will not go below that, and so for woodwinds, it's called the low C, but it's the same as the middle C. It's not exactly in the center of the keyboard, but it's close, and you have all of these octaves above it. All of these keys that are colored in are actually Cs. So if you have two black keys, they come in 2 and 3, 2 and 3. If you have 2, then the next note to the left, so next white note to the left of the 2 black notes is always going to be a C. So this is your middle C. C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C. That's another C. D, E, F, G, A, B, C. You know, and all the way up in the keyboard. And it's the same to the left. These would be bass notes, and these would be treble notes. Now, that does not mean that you can only play treble on these notes, because you can do hand switching. There's some music, and it's more complicated music, where actually your right hand may go to the left, and your left hand may go to the right, and you're playing like this for some of the more complicated music. It's not terribly common, but it does happen. So just as a general thumbnail sketch, this is the right of the keyboard, and your right hand basically would play these notes. This is the left of the keyboard, and these would be bass notes, and your left hand would play it. These would be the treble notes. So you have octaves, and some instruments only play 1 octave, but that doesn't mean they are terribly limited in their scope, because all of these octaves are really repeats of this octave here. Here's an octave, here's an octave, here's an octave, and you go C, D, E, F, G, then it switches to an A, B, C. That's the way it is. And it's repeated again. C, D, E, F, G, switch over, A, B, C. Now you don't ever get beyond the G. How come? You can't hear it. You know, we're limited by what we hear. C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C. Or if I wanted to start on the A and just use the alphabet, here's your C, here's your B, here's your A. So the C is that left white note right to the left of these two black notes, and it's repeated all the way up and down the keyboard. Two notes below this of the white note is going to be the A. So you could say it's A, B, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, all the way up and down the keyboard. The reason that you can play so much music on an instrument that only plays like maybe one octave or with maybe a couple of notes extra is that this gets repeated, but at a higher level still, and again at a higher level. They're basically the same notes, and they repeat that sequence. So I could start way down here. This note here is an A. It's a bass note. It's the lowest note of the key of any piano. A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and then you start with the A, B, C, D, E, F, G, all the way up. And I've got these C's marked so you can see that the octaves are just repeated over and over again. It may mean that you may have to play something that's lower key, but it's the same notes, or read it up higher, which higher notes, but it's still the same notes, but just higher. So this is the whole keyboard. So here we have C to a C above high C. Now these C's have names. Here's your middle C, or the low C. This would be like a mid-range C. This would be a C, a high C. And this high C is followed by the C above high C. That's what it is. It's C above high C. And these notes, only the piano can play. The flutes can go all the way up to here. They have like a 3-octave range, but this is played only by the piano. In fact, it's so high that they don't write music for it. So how do you know when you play it? They have something called an 8-VA, which I do not have written in here, but they have an 8-VA. That means play these notes an octave higher than they're written. Now, if you look down here, this is your middle C. This is the way it's written. This would be the highest note of the bass clef, if I had the bass clef written in, which I don't. But it's the lowest note of the treble clef. It's halfway between the treble and the bass clef. It has one line through it. That line is called a ledger line. You know when you see that one line that that's going to be middle C, and it's going to be equivalent to this note right here. Then you have this mid-range C right here, and it's on the third space up. How can you remember that? Well, if you remember the spaces, this is F, A, C, E. It's like if you spelled face, F, A, C, and it's in the third space up. And then if you went higher, you'd get that E. So that happens to be right here on the keyboard. Now this is your high C, and it has 2 lines through it. It has one through the note and one just below it. Those are ledger lines. And it comes to this right here. It's called the high C. That C is the high C. When you get to this C, the flutes can play it, the recorders cannot. But look at the ledger lines. There are 5 ledger lines ending just below this top note. That is a C. That is considered to be the C above high C. Now this, the flutes can't get. None of the other instruments that are woodwinds can get it either. And so what they do is they put 8-VA, and they're saying, play these notes here an octave higher, which can be done. It's just not written for because you would have so many ledger lines that you couldn't read the music. There's 5 here, and this is hard enough to read, but you would have more to get to the C above high C. Your note would be like up here somewhere. So it's just impossible to write for. Then when you get to the bass clef, this is going to be the C below, another C below, another C below. And then there are 2 notes beyond that B and that A. Now saxophones can get to this B flat. You know, this is your C, this is your B, this would be your B flat. A saxophone could get low. Now the clarinet can get down to this range. But most of the woodwind instruments, the low C is as low as they can get. The flutes can't get any lower than that. You know, that's the absolute lowest note of the flute. And sometimes the lowest note of an instrument is harder to play than a higher note because it requires less air, but you've got to aim it just right in order to get the note. So the low notes on the flute are harder to play than the higher notes, which basically you can play and they come out quite well because flute plays high notes very well. So I wanted to show you this. This is a B. It's 1 ledger line. It's below the C just by 1 step. This would be like, for example, it would be like this B right here. And this is the C. This is the C, high C. And this is the C above high C. And this is like impossible for the flutes to play. So it is the 8 VA, and pianos can play it. And sometimes it's hard to hear. You know, even on a piano, it's very high pitched, it's hard to hear. But the flutes can go up like 3 octaves. Now, there are some instruments that just can't play. I'm going to show you the ranges of the instruments. I guess I'll do that next. I'll put this down. Some of the ranges of the instruments. Okay, now we do a lot of work with instruments here that are just 1 octave instruments, like, for example, the tonette, the song flute, the flutophone, and then, of course, recorder is good because it can get 2 octaves. I think recorder is really a cut above some of those other instruments. But if you get here, here's your middle C, and here's your 1 octave. Here's the next C up. And what plays that? Well, your tonettes, well, the first, for 1 octave instruments, your tonettes, some flutes, flutophones, ocarinas, and instruments like that will get maybe 1 note above. Sometimes you can kind of squeak it out. Now, when you get to 2 octave ranges, you're going from here to here. That's really quite a bit. And you will get, like, for example, the melodicas, the recorders, the ocarinas, penny whistles, sassotos. You know, they have these, and there are more instruments than that, but basically those are the instruments that have the 2 octave range, and they go from here to here. Now, flutes will go from here to here. And then this is the piano range of where only the pianos can play it up here. Now you'd think you might be limited, and you are somewhat. Some instruments can't play certain things, but for the most part, these things, as I said before, these octaves are just kind of pushed up and pushed up and pushed up. If you look down here, this is that middle C we talk about with that 1 line, and this is the bass clef. And this is a treble clef. I didn't put the treble over here. I could have done that, but I didn't because you're not going to get notes in the treble clef unless you go from that low C on up. So here's your low C right here. Here's your mid-range C right here on the staff, and your C right here is your high C, and you notice 2 ledger lines. One of the lines goes through the note, the other's right below it, and this is your C above high C right here with the 5 ledger lines, and this is the piano range. So you have the simpler instruments playing this, the more complicated but still simple instruments playing this, like the recorders, melodicas, ocarinas, penny whistles, sassotos. These are the instruments I use basically are here. Then the flutes can go way up to here. This is their 3-octave range, and then this is the 8 VA range. That's what I'll call it, because no one writes music for it. But if you look at the range of all of the notes, here you go from your C to your C to your C to your C. 4 octaves of C's on the melodic part, on the melody part, you know, where the treble clef is. Then you have the bass clef, and it goes below here, but this just gives you an idea. All of the notes of the bass clef, which is in this range here, which the woodwinds don't play. I've only seen one instrument that is a woodwind instrument that's a treble clef instrument, and that's the bass recorder that can play bass clef. Most of them all play treble clef. Now, I happen to have a folded bass. You can have straight basses and great basses, and they go really very, very low. But that's unusual. Most start with that C and work on up. This is why I'm focusing on it. This is all going to be bass clef here. But you can see the range of the music, how high it gets. If you are, say, a student and you're playing flutophone, or you're playing a flute, whatever you're playing, if you're taking music lessons, you usually don't get a chance to see all this because teachers don't take the time. You know, they will tell you, well, you know, this is how you play this note, this is how you play this note, and if you use your fingers like this, then you're going to get a low D, and you know how to play the note. You recognize the note, that low D is right here. You recognize the note, and you can play it, you can see it on the staff, and you can play it, but that doesn't tell you where it is. It doesn't tell you what's above it. It doesn't tell you what's below it. Now, you know there are instruments, if you're playing in an orchestra or a school band or something like that, that go lower, but you don't know anything about the range, and you don't know how it's kind of set up. So in order to understand that, and understand how music is put together, and basically the relationship of notes to each other, the only way that you know that is to see it on a keyboard, but basically a full-scale keyboard like a piano or an organ, something that has a full range, then you can see what it is. There's all kinds of notes. If you're playing a saxophone, a clarinet, an oboe, bassoon, or a flute, you're in this range right here. And if the flute, you're a little higher. But this would be the range. And then trombones, basses, the lower instruments are down in this range here. But it's good to be able to see it, you know, and a lot of times, I'll take this down and I'm going to show you another one now. Sometimes I put charts on both sides. I want you to see this. Now remember, these are all homemade charts, so they're not going to have a real professional look to them because I've had to make them myself in order to show you what I want you to see. Now Rick will get this all set up, and you'll be able to see it more clearly. A lot of times when I show you some charts, or show you a fingering chart, or show you a keyboard, I just limit it to the 2-octave range when I see it. And this would be this right here. When I show you a chart, I don't necessarily bring in all of this. This is a full range 88 keyboard. It's actually 2 notes shy because I didn't have quite enough room to put the extra 2 notes, but they're down here, and it doesn't matter for what I'm going to show you. But most of the time when I show you a chart of a keyboard, I am right here. I'm doing two octaves. This is a low C, this would be like the middle C, and this would be the C above. So I get in 2 octaves of Cs. However, where is it? It's this. It's from here to here on a full scale piano or keyboard. Here to here. But you don't see all of this, and sometimes they'll say there are notes to the right of it, there are notes to the left of it. These are all the notes to the left of it, these are the bass notes, these are the notes to the right of it. These are all treble notes. But because we are playing, for the most part, on the woodwinds in this 2-octave range, I will limit sometimes my charts just to this 2-octave range, just for the ease of handling it. And when you look on top, see how far the bass really goes. It goes quite a ways. I've got 4 ledger lines here. I didn't put the stems on, but I have 4 ledger lines. This is the middle C, halfway between the bass clef and the treble clef. And the middle C is going to be halfway between. So it's going to be the highest note of the bass clef, and it's going to be the lowest note of the treble clef. And then these are all treble clef notes. This is the C above high C. And then beyond there, you have your 8 VA, which I did not draw in because no one writes music for it because it's so high you couldn't read it. Sometime I should just go ahead and write that in just to show you. I mean, I haven't had the time to do it. Just to show you how many more ledger lines you have to get those other notes, because it could be written in. But it's so difficult to read that nobody does it. They use the 8 VA. That means take these notes and play them an octave higher than they're written. And so therefore you don't have to read music for it. You read music up to this point, but you don't read music beyond that point because you already know you're going to go up an octave. But just for experience, I'm going to see when I can get the time to do that. So your first octave is here, tonettes, flutophones, song flutes, and some pan flutes. I mean, there's others included. Then from here to here is your 2-octave range, and that's from here to here on the keyboard, and it includes melodicas, ocarinas, penny whistles, sasutos, recorders, the kind of instruments that we play in here. And then this is your high C above high C. Only the flute is going to get that. The regular flute is going to get that. And then there's an octave above that, which would be this last octave here that only the pianos can reach because they're the only ones that can do it. So middle C or low C, mid-range C, high C, C above high C, which is the equivalent of this right here, and that extra octave, 8 VA. Now, I hope that this is going to be a help to you just in terms of understanding music. I have more charts to show you. I may show you next time because I do want to have you really understand the broadest aspects of music. And it'll be important for you if you're ever playing in an orchestra, and it'll add to your musical knowledge just to see and understand what this is. And most teachers don't teach it, and I'm sorry that they don't. They didn't teach me. I more or less learned it because I had 3 years of piano lessons, but I learned it in such a way that I can just show people about it without having to play a piano to get you there. And you don't need to be able to play piano to understand these basic things about the keyboard. So if a child wants to play a trumpet, let them play a trumpet. If you try to get them to play something else that they don't want to play, simply because it's better for them, there are easier ways to teach them what they need to know without forcing them to play an instrument they don't want before they play the instrument that they do want. The danger of forcing something on a child that they don't want is that they'll just give up on it. I want to play the trumpet, I want to play the saxophone, I don't want to play this or that. And if you force them to, they're not going to learn anything. They're not going to enjoy it. They want what they want. And I think part of that is genetic. Musical ability is genetic anyway. But I also take it a step further. I think the kinds of instruments that a child is drawn to are also part of their genetics. I always wanted from the time I was a little child to play the saxophone. My father was a brilliant musician. He didn't play the saxophone, but he made sure at some point that I had a saxophone to play. And then it went on to the other woodwinds from there. So I think a lot more of this is genetic than people understand. It's not I want to play an instrument so much as I want to play this instrument or that instrument. But they still need to know some of the basic things about music, where it comes from and how the notes relate to each other, and what easier, better way to do it than on a keyboard. And usually when I taught lessons, I had a keyboard with me that would play, not just charts, but a keyboard that would actually play. Not that they wanted them to play the keyboard or that I wanted to play it for them, but just to show them various things about music that they need to know, like the relationships between sharps and flats, and how a sharp can become a flat, and a flat can become a sharp. You know, there's a lot to it, but it's all very interesting. So we will continue. We're about out of time. We'll continue with this next time. Please join me then.